The ground is frozen solid and the field looks dead. Snow presses flat against the soil, sealing it beneath a hard white crust. There are no crops standing, no green shoots, no visible signs of life. Yet inside a nearby farmhouse, a meal is being prepared. It is modest, repetitive, and carefully measured, but it exists. For the peasants who live here, winter is not a surprise. Hunger is not new. What keeps them fed is not luck, but knowledge learned long before the war arrived. When World War II tore through Europe, rural families found themselves cut off from markets, supply lines, and state assistance. Armies moved through their land, requisitioned animals, seized harvests, and destroyed infrastructure. Ration systems rarely reached isolated villages consistently. For peasants, survival depended on methods refined over generations, adapted quietly to wartime conditions. These were not official strategies. They were habits, routines, and tricks shaped by poverty and necessity. One of the most important survival methods was staggered harvesting. Instead of gathering all crops at once, peasants deliberately left portions of their fields unharvested, pulling food from the ground gradually. Root vegetables such as potatoes, turnips, and beets were left buried as long as possible, insulated by soil. Even under snow, the earth provided protection from frost. This reduced the need for large storage spaces and prevented spoilage. Food remained fresh because it was never fully removed from its natural storage. Cellar layering was another essential practice. Underground storage rooms were divided not by shelves alone, but by temperature zones. The coldest areas near the floor held vegetables that needed near-freezing conditions. Higher shelves stored grains and dried foods. Walls were used for hanging cured items. Nothing was placed randomly. This natural temperature management allowed peasants to store food for months without modern refrigeration, even through long winters. Fermentation, was not just a culinary choice, but really a preservation strategy. Cabbage, cucumbers, and other vegetables were carefully fermented in barrels using salt. This method extended the shelf life while, importantly, preserving nutrients that were often lost in dried foods. Fermented vegetables could last through entire winters and even into early spring, at times when no fresh produce was available at all. Peasant families understood well that fermentation was as much insurance against illness as it was against hunger. Another, genius method involved something called rotational consumption. Families never ate just one food until it was gone. Instead, they would rotate between different stores, taking only small amounts from each. This approach prevented the total depletion of any single supply and, honestly, reduced the psychological shock of suddenly running out. It also helped minimize spoilage, since stores were checked regularly. This kind of discipline required real restraint, especially when hunger was a constant companion. Hidden food caches were, in fact, quite common in occupied regions. Peasants would bury sealed containers of grain, dried vegetables, or fat in fields, forests, or even beneath barns. These caches were spaced apart deliberately so that the discovery of one wouldn't mean a total loss. Sometimes caches were actually forgotten and then rediscovered months later, often when desperation was at its peak. This kind of decentralization protected families from confiscation by occupying forces. Animal integration was, another overlooked survival trick. Chickens, rabbits, and goats were chosen not for abundance, but for their efficiency. These animals required minimal feed and could survive on scraps. Their manure fertilized small garden plots, kind of closing the survival loop. Nothing was wasted. Even when livestock numbers were low, these animals provided eggs, milk, or occasional meat throughout the year. Finally, peasants preserved fuel alongside food. Dried dung, peat, and wood were stored carefully to make sure cooking could continue through winter. Food without fuel was useless. Meals were designed to be reheated repeatedly, not cooked from scratch each time. Pots stayed on low heat for hours, conserving resources. These methods were not written down. They were taught through observation and repetition. Children learned them before they even understood war. When armies came and went, these practices remained. They didn't guarantee comfort, but they prevented collapse. These were not emergency tricks. They were long-term strategies built for uncertainty. Even today, they remain relevant wherever supply chains fail and time becomes the most valuable resource.